In this edition of Behind the Disney Classics, we will be taking a look at the making of the 50-second feature in the Walt Disney Animation's classic canon, and the studio's journey into the virtual video game world. A movie which seems like an odd choice for Disney, but one which went on to be a fan favourite after being caught in production hell for over 20 years. Released in 2012, it is Wreck-It Ralph. Wreck-It Ralph traces its origins back to Disney Animation in the late 1980s, where the studio were considering a traditionally animated 8-bit video game feature titled High Score. Presumably little development was done on this, considering it was never greenlit, and there's scarce information out there about this iteration of the project. The studio would revisit the idea again a decade later, when in the late 1990s, animator and director Sam Levine began redeveloping the idea as Joe Jump. Joe Jump is one of Disney's most famous lost projects, a traditionally animated film in which Levine and his team of writers and artists heavily developed and conceptualized for years. Joe Jump fell into production hell when Disney were hesitant to greenlight the project, believing that the main character was missing that little something that would make an 8-bit character lovable and relatable. In 2006, when John Lasseter was named the new Chief Creative Officer at Disney, a bunch of projects that were on the drawing board that Lasseter deemed un-Disney were taken out of development. It's believed that Joe Jump was still knocking around at the studio at this time and was amongst the casualties. A number of years later, Lasseter called upon animation veteran and close friend Rich Moore to begin work on a Disney feature. Moore was then best known for his animation and directorial work on The Simpsons and Futurama. Lasseter suggested that Moore have a crack at redeveloping the long gestating video game project, which could now be developed as a 3D animation. At first, Moore was hesitant to take on a feature about a video game character, believing that characters with predetermined actions and destinies weren't exciting or lovable enough to carry a movie. However, when he began brainstorming the story, he came upon the idea of a video game character who wanted to break away from his destiny. While elements of Joe Jump remained in Moore's final product, Wreck-It Ralph would become a completely different feature, with some sources saying that Moore completely ignored both Joe Jump and High Score altogether, instead simply using them as building blocks. Moore and his team were originally developing the movie to focus around the character of Fix-It Felix, which would see him rebelling against his father as he goes on a virtual journey of self-discovery, denying his destiny to go into the family business of fixing things. Ralph was of course in these early specs as well, but was being developed as Felix's antagonist and assumedly the film's main villain. However, as development drew on, Moore began to realize that the character of Ralph was more interesting and entertaining, and decided to refocus the movie to feature Ralph as the main protagonist. In May of 2010, Disney announced that their Joe Jump project would finally be released under the title of Reboot Ralph. They announced that they would release the movie in March of 2013, however, as a result of a schedule shake-up the following year, the movie was moved up to a November 2012 release date and was retitled Wreck-It Ralph. Ralph's production seems to have been fairly straightforward once the ball was finally rolling. The movie is, however, notable for being the one which introduced Disney's use of bidirectional reflectance distribution functions, basically a technology that would allow for more realistic surface reflections. It was also the first feature to use a new virtual cinematography camera capture system, which would allow animators to use actual cameras to virtually move through scenes and shoot the movie in real time. One of the most interesting things about Ralph is also its use of sub-licensing and cross-promotion, something that Disney had never really done aside from Roger Rabbit and Toy Story. The movie would include 188 cameos from pre-existing characters, licensed from companies such as Nintendo, Sega, Midway, and Namco, with character appearances from games such as Mario, Donkey Kong, Sonic, Pac-Man, and Street Fighter. When Ralph was finally released, it may have been a completely different beast than what was originally intended with Joe Jump, but regardless, it would be critically and commercially praised and would garner the largest opening for a Walt Disney Animation Studios film ever at the time in the US. Ralph would even be nominated for Best Animated Feature at the 85th Academy Awards, but would lose to Disney Pixar's Brave. In more recent years, Wreck-It Ralph has become a cult Disney classic, enough so to warrant Disney Animation to release a sequel, Ralph Breaks the Internet, in 2018. However unlikely, this makes Ralph only the 4th Disney animation to receive a theatrical sequel produced by Walt Disney Animation. Me personally, I'm not a huge fan of Wreck-It Ralph. I think it's a fun and enjoyable movie, but it's definitely not one of my favorites. I love the characters and I think the animation is absolutely spectacular. Regardless, I do think it is a worthy movie in the Walt Disney Animation Classics canon. Thank you for joining me for another edition of Behind the Disney Classics. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button down below, and if you'd like to join me for future installments, hit subscribe. While you're at it, don't forget to check out my past editions in the Behind the Disney Classics series. I hope I'll see you again soon, guys. Take care, and have a magical day.